Alrighty, welcome back to another episode on Cut Rate History. Today I want to talk about the Sig P320. There's a lot of that going around. I figured I'd give you guys my 2 cents here. And just a little channel update, I suppose. What I really want to build this into is sort of a mix between the Fat Electrician and Forgotten Weapons. Those were absolutely two of my biggest influences. And that's where I kind of want to steer this channel. Those of you that have been here since the beginning know my background, that I'm a classically trained historian. I used to be a teacher, I was an administrator, things like that. But even before that, I was in the firearms industry. I've been in the firearms industry for 6 or 7 years now. I was an instructor. I've trained with several police departments. I've done several police department qualifications. I have trained with the Massachusetts State Police, SWAT guys. I've done a bunch of stuff across my time in the industry. And like I said, I just figured I'd just give my 2 cents on this whole Sig Sauer thing, because I have worked closely with Sig reps and other people in the industry who have a lot of insight on things like this. Let's just get into it. I own 2 Sig 320s and have for a while. The first one I got was the Texas Ranger Edition, which is really just a standard P320 full size with some extra engravings. It's nothing special, mechanically speaking. I put that into one of the AXG metal grip modules, and I used that for a really long time. I did a lot of those police department qualifications with that gun. I have thousands and thousands of rounds through it. And the other one I have is the X10. I used that a lot when we moved to 10 millimeter, and I can explain that transition at a later date. But we went from using 9 millimeter 320s to the 10 for a couple different reasons. And just wanted to throw that out there. I do have several thousand rounds through the 10 millimeter version of the 320 as well. Although that being said, it's not the large FCU that is typically having the issues that everybody's been talking about. But I just want to throw that out there. I have 2 of them. I have thousands of rounds through them both. So I have some time behind a 320. If you are unaware of what's going on, there have been several reports basically since the 320 came out that it will fire without having the trigger pulled. That first came out in 2017 with it not being drop safe. If you dropped it at a certain angle, the gun would go off. SIG didn't admit that, but they did implement the voluntary upgrade program, which they would go in and fix your trigger because it would go off if you dropped it. That said, I can say I have dropped my 9mm 320 an embarrassing amount of times with a round in the chamber, running through several fairly difficult courses of fire, and mine has never gone off, but, you know, sample size of 1 9mm 320 there. It does seem to be happening with any size 320 that is the 9mm FCU. It seems that there is some problem with sear engagement and a irrepeatable safe lockup. More recently, there have been a lot of videos coming out of mainly police officers whose firearms have gone off without them being in their hands. Some way or another, their holster gets jostled, or they're reholstering, or one video you even see he's just walking through the lobby and the gun goes off. I was very skeptical for a very long time. Like I said, I worked fairly closely with a lot of Sig Sauer reps, and obviously, yes, they're biased, but they were guys that I trusted. And the first set of allegations that came out, very dubious. There was like a lot of police departments who were doing weird things. There was a little bit of tomfoolery going on. They were trying to one department was trying to reshape 226 holsters to fit a 320 by putting them in ovens or something like that. There was some weird things going on. So initially, I didn't believe it, at least not to the degree or the negligence that people were saying. What really got my attention was the airman who lost his life recently. The released story goes that his military version, which is the M17 and the M18, he took the holster off of his body, gun still in the holster, sat down at his desk, put the gun on his desk, and the putting the gun on his desk somehow made it go off, and it hit him in the chest and unfortunately caused him to lose his life. This it convinced me to look into a lot more of the cases with a lot more scrutiny. Previously, in my head, it was too much of a liability for the military to adopt a handgun that was unsafe. It didn't make sense to me that they would cover something up when they knew that service members could be dying. If you know anything about Vietnam history, when the M16 came out, they issued it with the wrong powder and no cleaning kits and a bunch of stuff like that because it was aluminum and they thought it needed to be cleaned, and it caused a lot of guys to lose their life. And then that was remediated very quickly. It doesn't seem like that's the case here until the serviceman lost his life. I know that several parts of several branches are not allowed. They put out memos that you are not allowed to use the 320 system, M17, M18, until further notice. Anybody who had one is getting it replaced with an M4 until they can figure out what's going on. And it looks like there's a lot of validity to this. If you guys want to check out a channel on YouTube who does a great breakdown, it's this gentleman here, the Wyoming Gun Project. It's this video where he kind of breaks it down. And if you look at the trigger guard of this picture, this is just a screen grab from that video. What he does here is he uses a caliper and a screw to basically find the minimum amount of movement in the trigger that would allow movement of the slide to allow the gun to go off. So basically, how little can the trigger be pulled for some outside force on the slide to make the gun go off? And turns out it's surprisingly little. The problem with the 320 itself, or originally the selling point of the 320, was that it's a fully cocked striker, which gives you a very nice trigger pull, as opposed to something like a Glock, who has a partially pulled striker. So on a Glock, part of your trigger pull is bringing the striker to full cock and then releasing it. That's why Glocks typically don't have great triggers. Sig's 320 was a fully cocked striker, allowing you to have a fairly good trigger pull on a striker-fired gun. This is unusual. The other unusual thing about the 320 is that it's a striker-fired gun without a trigger safety, something that would prevent the gun from going off without the trigger being pulled. Now, most of the time, this is due to this is a safety that has to do with drop safety and inertia. Is the trigger heavy enough so that when that inertia is transferred on the gun hitting the ground, is the weight, the mass of the trigger enough to pull or release the striker? In something on like a Glock or an M&P, regardless of how much you pull on the trigger itself, without that centerpiece being depressed, you can't pull the trigger. The 320 doesn't have that. And that was the original drop safety issue in 2017. Now, a lot of people I've talked to are saying, well, all this proves is that the gun goes off when you pull the trigger, which, yes and no, that's a misleading way to put it. What the Wyoming Gun Project has proved is that if there is a small amount of movement in the trigger, then outside forces on the rest of the gun can cause it to go off. The issue here is that, the amount that he is moving the trigger is a fraction of a millimeter. And anybody who's had any serious trigger time on a handgun understands that under a variety of circumstances, the trigger can move a fraction of a millimeter, and that doesn't mean that your gun should go off. Your gun going off should be an overly deliberate act, not an accident. So anything from lint, from if you're concealed carrying it, if you're putting it in an OWB holster, if you're throwing it, you're at the range and you toss it on the table, anything like that can cause the trigger to move that little. And it's that small amount of movement that the Wyoming Gun Project has proved that other forces will allow the gun to go off. Now, where we're seeing this is mostly in law enforcement, people who are constantly holstering, unholstering during training, and then while, if they're beat cops or in the car, chasing somebody, anything like that, the firearm is being jostled, it's being, moved around a lot. Even in a holster, your trigger can move that small amount. And if that small amount can set up conditions for the gun to go off without it being touched, there is an issue. Ooh. Pardon that, I have Archer's ringtone. At this point, there's kind of empirical proof that some 320s do have a a trigger safety issue. It's not all. My 320 is proof that it doesn't have that issue. That was in and out of several different holsters with lots of different lights, under a massive variety of conditions, and under, like I said, several thousands of rounds. It seems that I got a good one, and that the vast majority of people have a good one. But unless you are willing to take the risk to find out if you got a good one, it's not safe. And as someone who worked in the firearms industry for a long time, it's very hard to endorse something like this. And I love Sig Sauer. Like I said, I have two 320s. I have a 220. I have a variety of Sig handguns. And it's a shame that this is where it's gone, because I think the 320 in concept is a great gun. The FCU can revolutionize, the handgun market in the future. If somebody like Glock took this and ran with it, it would explode. And I guess that's kind of all I have to say. Go check out Wyoming Gun Project's video. He breaks it down much more intricately. I just wanted to throw it on here in case you guys hadn't seen it or heard about it. This is where we're at. Like I said, several branches of the military have ceased use until further notice. I even saw that some parts of the Marine Corps are asking for M9 A3s and A4s because they don't want to use the 320 platform anymore. It seems like they might dump it altogether. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know this is unscheduled and not usual, but I do want to do a lot of firearms content on here moving forward. And that's it. Thanks for coming out, and I'll catch you in the next one.